Hello. Okay, nice to be here. Thanks for turning up. This is a topic that, unlike a lot of other things that you gradually begin to pick up over the internet here and there, that I've sort of been researching for 2 years, and a lot of this stuff you won't find online, so it's all quite original. I think if many of you are about my age, if you're sort of 30s, 40s, you'll remember the Falklands War, and so hopefully some of this will sort of resonate with you a bit, because we were told it was all about Britain going down to save a series of islands with a few people on, sent this huge task force down, and even at the time I remember thinking that was a bit strange, and I've just spoken to someone outside who said exactly the same thing, that at 10 or 11 years old they wondered what was going on with this huge great war, this great sort of jingoistic fervour that came when we sent our troops and carriers down there for this war with Argentina. So I'll set my timer. Okay. This is a video that introduces it but gives the tone for what I'm about to then cover afterwards. So there are some hints in here. You'll recognise the series that it's from. So if you pay attention to the little bits of dialogue that are going on here between the famous Nick Pope type guy, or Nick Pope wannabe type guy, you'll get the gist. Right. So I got into this weird area of the Falklands and what I'm about to talk about now, and then suddenly remembered that that was the X-Files, that wasn't the series, that was the movie. Then went back and rewatched it, and it was absolutely uncanny. I knew that there was some similar themes, but I didn't realise how close it was. So, as people have suggested before, Chris Carter, who did the whole X-Files series, as you know, you also saw he did The Lone Gunman, where they had the plane fly into the World Trade Center a month before the actual event happened in 2001. So Chris Carter is very plugged into something, and if you are intrigued by anything you hear in the next hour, go and rent, download, whatever, the X-Files movie, the first one, and see what you think after you've heard this. Okay, so that was the headline, as well as the event going off. That was the headline that captured my imagination as a kid, aged 11. That was due, I think, if you read the small print, that was when the British finally sank the Belgrano, which, if you remember, Thatcher ordered. It was outside the exclusion zone. It created a huge problem. It killed about 350 Argentine sailors. They then responded with the whole thing that you then saw after in the Gulf, where they came and attacked our ships when they were in the bay near the Falklands, and I think HMS Sheffield was sunk, and a hospital ship, lots of stuff, and so there was big retaliation for that, and in a way you can understand that, because their main ship was steaming out and away from the area. So, and as usual, our Murdoch Empire puts a classic war, it's like something out of the 40s, a headline like that got you. And I remember as a kid seeing that, thinking it was a bit, just slightly sick that this weird war atmosphere had taken hold of the country. So I put here the behind the media hype that boosted, and it did boost. Thatcher's ratings were slumping at the time. Thatcher got back in, poll ratings went up, she got back in for a second term with the Tories. But beneath all that, beneath this strange idea that we should travel down to protect these tiny little islands thousands of miles away, there was another agenda going on. I put the ET aspects of the scenario are both central, but sufficient evidence also exists to make a strong case without it. In other words, the ET issue is core to what I'm about to say, but also I think what I'm hoping to do is that I can make the point that the evidence that surrounds that isn't exactly ET based demonstrates the fact that was taking place. I put here about some situations in life, and I don't think things work like that. Just as I said, certain things trigger, like headlines in newspapers, the gotcha headline, the whole issue of the Falklands, other stuff. You meet people, and then a few years later you realise you had a conversation with that person, and something registers that then makes more sense at the time than it did at that moment. This was another situation when I had just finished Bradford University, and we'd been to see Pink Floyd, The Wall on IMAX, and anyway, a late night, went for a curry, I can't remember now, must have been discussing with my friends or friend that I was in there with, must have been discussing the UFO issue. Something came up like that, and from the table next door there was a well-built guy and his partner, and basically he chipped in and said something like, I was down at the Falklands and you should have seen what was going on down there. A lot more was going on down there than people were told. And I think he said something about lights in the sky, I don't know what else. And of course, had that been now, I would have taken that conversation up, but either in that state, don't know whether I was drunk or whatever, but just passed it on. Didn't have a huge interest in this area then. But undoubtedly he was an enlisted soldier, a British soldier, and for him to come out with something like that was didn't seem bizarre at the time, now seems quite bizarre, and now of course makes sense. Okay, so just surrounding this and to build the case up that there's a lot of activity going on down in that area, because of course the Falklands, you'll see a map in a minute, but the Falkland Islands, including the main area that I'm going to focus on, which is the South Sandwich Islands. I don't know how much geography you know, it's all quite strange down there, because you've got Antarctica, which is just this huge continent, and you've got these tiny islands. Of course, you've got Argentina and Chile and stuff coming down. So I just wanted to make the point that there's a lot of activity down there, and there's a couple of cases here, just briefly to show that around that time, exactly in 1981-82, Falklands War was in 82, April to June 82. Keep that sort of year and that date in mind, because it'll crop up all the way through to prove the point of the main context of what I'm trying to say. So this is one contactee, really fascinating case. Found it recently. That this guy, I'll just call him Ricardo because I can't pronounce his last name, had an encounter with alien entities. He'd had no contact before, to his knowledge. He was on the Argentine mainland, and I think he was out running or doing farm work or something, and basically this ship landed. These ETs appeared in front of him, and they took him away to a base. This case, really quite prominent. The more I looked into it, you have to get used to using Google Translate, because of course most of this is in Spanish. None of this has leaked into English. Some of it had, because most of you have heard of J. Allen Hynek. Well, he reviewed this case. They flew to a conference, as you'll see in a minute, National UFO Conference, and presented this whole case. So the guy was basically vetted. So yeah, taken to a base by these aliens in the Andes is where it happened to be, and they told us some interesting things. The other point I'll make is, as he went to give this, after this happened, as he went to both Argentina and the US to meet J. Allen Hynek and to present at a conference, the Argentinian intelligence service actually went with him. This is way after, this is some years later. They actually went with him, and he was observed when he was in America by what he thinks were American intelligence, but the top-ranking Argentine intelligence agency, apparently there's 6, the top-ranking one there, gave him protection all the way over on the flight and also while he was staying there. So again, something strange going on, and that was recognized. So there was 3 contacts in all, but there was the usual stuff they told you about, bits about Atlantis, bits about the Earth being in disaster, ecological disaster, all the usual stuff that we get with contact cases. But then, interestingly, the point that I was interested in, this was, again, 1982, February the 23rd, so 3 or 4 months before the outbreak of the Falklands War. They basically said that they took me to the same underground station, and he saw big 3D screens, saw the South Pole, ice flows and battles. Then I realised it was the war in the Falkland Islands. So as so often happens in contact cases, they often put things up either transmitted straight to the contactee's mind or up on a screen in front of them and literally show future events, sometimes made up events, but in this case obviously proved to be real. And they basically told him that the war was going to break out, and that the Argentinians would lose, the British would win this war. So again, 3 months ahead of the actual outbreak. Interesting point again that I've highlighted in yellow at the bottom. They also explained to me that this was about more business than war, and that's quite an important aspect of this, because of course if you look at the Falkland Islands as we know it, it was more about military and sovereignty and that sort of thing. Very little to do with business on a glance, but you'll see as we get along then there was something else having taken place. interestingly, just right up from those dates, obviously, I think he gave his testimony to someone in the Argentine UFO circle, and so prior to this conference, remember, the Argentine intelligence then actually tortured him. I think he was held in jail for 2 or 3 weeks and tortured on and off and then picked up again. So they wanted to find out what he knew. They thought he was a spy because he'd come out and told people about this war and that the British were going to win. So they thought he was a spy, and he got into a fair bit of trouble over that. This is a separate case, but it's more pertinent in a way because this takes place on a base that was actually very close to the Falklands in Argentina itself. And basically, I haven't printed the whole thing here, but essentially a soldier goes through the whole thing that him and his whole troop came out of their base one night. This is when the war had started, and basically they saw a huge UFO, and their troop carrier, there's some troops coming towards their base, actually then got moved, this light appeared, and this troop carrier with a dozen, whatever, Argentine soldiers in, was moved from one field to another one a couple of miles away. So again, a lot of stuff going on, and reports mostly from the Argentines, very difficult. Apart from my case in the Cosmic Curry House, most of these testimonies I've got are from Argentine troops. One hint here, which came up recently, which is really quite interesting. These are from, if you know, we've had our, I think it's the penultimate, we got the release from the MOD files. You know, most of these are fairly boring. I don't look through a lot of these, but someone alerted me to this one because they knew the topic I was doing. And basically it's interesting. I'll try and find the bit. Don't know if you can read it there, bottom. I can't read it on my screen. So this has been released. It was a discussion between the Navy, I think, if I remember rightly. So this has been released this July, and it says, whoever's writing this, I'm sure I'm not the only person to note the sharp fall. I don't understand that bit of the number of UFO reports received since the beginning of the Falklands dispute. I have received one letter claiming that large numbers of UFOs have been seen in the vicinity of the task force. And then there's a little military joke at the end, presumably by little green men in ponchos. So again, basically a file release from government level, military level, stating that there was a lot of activity down by the Falkland Islands. So as we mentioned, the geography, the map will come up in a minute, but you all know about this, Scott going to the Antarctic, big area of exploration. That was all sort of 19th century. As we move into the more current era, what you begin to see is it's absolutely bizarre. If you go on something like Wikipedia and bring up, say, Soviet expeditions and research in Antarctica, you'll find endless lists of where the Soviets, you know, for the last century and longer have been exploring this area of Antarctica and this South Atlantic area where the Falklands are. As we get into the pre-war and post-war period, World War II, then suddenly they start setting up bases. They start taking huge planes down there. So something more is going on down there already. You can tell by, you know, you look at the Second World War period, something huge is going on there without having to think, well, this is just about testing for minerals or looking for oil. Actually, the oil thing comes up with the Falklands all the time. If you actually look into it, the whole excuse of oil, pulling oil apparently out of Antarctic waters down there is really costly. It costs, because the conditions are so wild down there, drilling has to be so deep that actually it's not a huge place, despite what you may think for oil. Mineral deposits and stuff may be another issue, but anyway, undoubtedly all the research I've done looking into this suggests that all those excuses for oil and minerals and other things, and looking at penguins, whatever you want to do, the amount of expeditions going down there were way outweighed by that. There's something else is going on there. You'll know about the Germans and the Nazis, but just as Hitler came to power in mid-30s, they literally went down there, sent some of his best men down there, dropped flags all over Antarctica, and claimed this area of Queen Maud and New Schwabenland down there. Soviets became very regular visitors, as I said. Go and look back on Wikipedia, you'll see the amount of times the Soviets have been going down there. And they started establishing these research stations under the guise of mineral research, usually. The British, it starts to get interesting, the British have had bases down there more or less permanently. We're actually in charge, Britain is in charge of the Global Antarctic Survey, something like that, but we basically do all the mapping, right? We do 80% of the mapping in that region, and so we've got a good degree of control over it and have permanent bases and positions down there. Just one quick example. Again, 1943, they may not look like soldiers, they were backed up by commandos. Operation Tabarin was a military undertaking that basically was decided that we're going to go and do another land. They'd seen that the Germans had been down there, and they went and do a land grab also down there. So we sent commandos down there, and again, this guise of a science station also, put a few scientists on and try and grab land and see what you can do for research. Interestingly, this was a response to flag games. Again, the Argentines had been down there again on Deception Island, which is north of Antarctica, I think, and this was a response to them. So this history with Argentina goes back quite some time, if you look at it. Just two examples. Most of you'll know about Operation High Jump, 1947. Admiral Byrd went down with the US. Huge, massive fleet went down. And, you know, asking what sort of reason. That was just after Hitler had been down. There's a rumour that the Nazis had got a base down there. There was actually, I've checked the quote up on this, there was a whole, this rumour about saucer wars taking place down there, that the fleet had to basically do a runner really quickly because saucers came out. And there's one quote from a soldier called John Sayerson, which has actually been, someone's traced him. He gives this quote about these things came out of the water and fired on us and stuff. So again, that seems to be the whole issue of Operation High Jump seems to be validated, apart from Admiral Byrd's diaries, which some people seem to think are made up. That's the whole idea. He went to found the centre of the Earth and found this alien race there who told him various things. So don't know about that. Example there, the Soviets again, and what countries do. Britain have done it, Argentina have done it. When you've been down to the Antarctic, you release a set of stamps, and that's that basically that's your claim then to that area. So it needs to be a sort of national pastime for some reason. Hitler's base, Germany down there, 1943. Interesting quote that Karl Dönitz, he was the submarine commander at the time, but you know, 1943, so still fairly early after all this exploration they did. Germany's submarine fleet is proud that it created an unassailable fortress for the Führer on the other end of the world. There's actually now, the Russians have just released some documents showing these huge, great maps that they've translated, Russian intelligence translated, that give these directions for these submarines going into the Antarctic through these caverns, and huge, really complex directions. Then apparently you come up into this sort of oasis, this Agartha, as they call it, this underground sort of world. So there's the best to get a gist on where these places are. Okay, so African continent, there's Argentina down there. This bit that's been expanded here, Falkland Islands there. What we're interested in, I can't reach over, I don't think. Those strip of islands at the bottom, we're going to be focusing on the bottom island there. That's called Southern Thule, T-H-U-L-E. If you know about some of the German esoteric stuff, they call it Thule. There's the Thule Society. They do all the stuff with the Brill energy to do with how they levitate craft and stuff. So for some reason, this island was named Thule or Thule, and that's the South Sandwich Islands down there, that little ring, and the very bottom one there is the Southern Thule, which we're going to be expanded on. Quick history of the Falklands War. If you go back into history, it's the usual suspects, the usual colonial sort of stuff. So you get these skirmishes, you know, France, I put them on there, Britain, Spain, Portugal, all down there, you know, in the era of when people could first get out sailing around and claiming territory, having little wars over these islands. Interestingly, it all then accelerates when you get to sort of this last century in the mid-60s. And actually goes to UN level, where you're having these squabbles with Argentina over who should have the domination over these islands. And particularly, it's not just to do with the islands. You've got to remember, it's also to wherever you get a cluster of land, you also get maritime rights around that. You get the sea exclusion zone, which is for, you know, fishing rights, mineral rights. So it's not just the land. But we don't know yet if there were some other issues going on in the 60s. I don't know how far this thing that I'm going to talk about goes back. So basically, yeah, it was handed over. It says, under the Constitution, the islands were administered by a British governor. Argentina and Great Britain, its sovereignty was disputed since the middle of year 1960 in the United Nations. So that was battled out in the United Nations. But as you know, we've basically governed since then, and Argentina's done these vague claims to it, which then, for some reason, accelerated in the period that we're going to go on about. So the important parts and where Thule Island starts to come in, as we've got in the mid-70s. Argentina suddenly, on Thule Island, as you'll see in a minute, built this base. They built a base that was supposedly for weather and, again, minerals and all the sort of stuff that you do in those sorts of areas. It was known at the time that that would at least annoy the British. So remember that day, 1976, this base gets built. There was lots of diplomatic sort of channeling to do with this base. They're saying, you know, you've got to take it down. The Argentinians just ignored it. As part of this then, later on, of course, in 1982, Port Stanley of the Falklands is invaded. The British respond, one of their first responses was to do this long Vulcan bomber flight, this huge, from Ascension Island, which the US had lent them, to go destroy the landing strips on the Falkland Islands. Literally, the war lasted 2 months. You know, it was in quite a concentrated area. You know, really, the Argentine were well equipped, but you know, British weaponry. You'll find out why also in a minute. So the war lasted actually 2 months. The issue I'm going on about goes on and on. And in 1990, diplomatic relations then carry on with Argentina. One example that I found looking into this area about just how serious the Falklands War got. So, you know, start thinking about this in a different context at the end. If you remember this quote at the end, it's how much did Thatcher know at the end about the discussion that we're about to have. I thought this was really interesting. The fact is that Mitterrand rushes in to see his psychoanalyst, who's the guy who's written the book on this, and basically is cursing about Mrs. Thatcher, basically saying that she sent 4 nuclear submarines onto the coast of Argentina and is threatening to nuke Argentina unless President Mitterrand gives her the code to the Exocet missiles. Now, of course, the French built the Exocet missile and had sold them, as they do, these sort of war whores that produce and just sell them to you know, whichever country, and then don't think about the consequences. The problem was that these Exocets, to disable them so our ships didn't get blown up, had a secret encrypted code, and Thatcher demanded from based on this blackmail of, you know, imagine his situation. You've got these, she's saying she's got nuclear submarines about to nuke Argentina, and she's saying you will give us these disabling access codes to the Exocet missile. I think we'd already had one ship sunk by an Exocet by then, and that was backing up her point. But I thought that was an interesting snippet about, again, about just underneath the surface, this thing got really quite big. Okay, that's a picture of the base. So in 1976, we said this is the scientific base that they basically built. You can see lots of communication aerials there. It's built up off the ground. You've got to remember that down here you've got Antarctic temperatures. I think it goes down to down to like minus 60 degrees Celsius at points, just impossibly cold. So harsh conditions there. What we had at the time, which interestingly was about to be scrapped in 1981, they're about to scrap it. We had HMS Endurance, which wasn't a warship as such. It could be equipped for war sort of measures. But it was down there, it's an icebreaker, and it sort of patrols that area. In 1981, about 1980, we were about to scrap HMS Endurance. We couldn't afford it, so that was going to be scrapped. Magically, because of the Falklands campaign, and we think because of other issues, then Endurance doesn't get scrapped, it gets a refit, and since then we've had another even bigger one built called HMS Protector, I think is around at the moment. So yeah, as I said, you get the various because this base has been built on Fool Island, which basically is counted as British territory as part of the South Sandwich Islands. You've got this diplomatic stuff going back and forth. Also, as you'll see from the next slide, I think it's the next one. Right. You basically got flyovers by the crew from the icebreaker. We're flying over and keeping an eye on what was happening with the space that the Argentinians had built. What I basically found out, and I'll tell you how in a minute, is that what was causing all the intrigue and what caused this sudden base to be built by the Argentinians is that there was, in fact, you had an above-ground base on the southern Thule itself, the Argentinians had built. For several years before, this certain ET group had built a base underneath. And it's the mission that they were on, and they were there for a certain reason, and they had to be in that sort of environment for a certain reason. It's claimed that this base was there, this is the ET base, from the World War I era, deep underground. The ET project required this lab to be in the Antarctic climate. This group are called the Blues. This is the guy that I've met that's disclosed this bit of stuff. They're from a planet called Haven. But anyway, there's a whole backstory to that I haven't got time to go into. they're called, it's a blue, apparently, and I've had this confirmed by other people who have heard about this when I started talking about it. They apparently look like E.T. version of Smurfs. You remember the Smurfs that were around in the 70s? They look slightly like that, and you find references to blue races, not in just, I don't know if they look like that, you know, there's a description from the guy that I've been in touch with, who had a whole series of experiences with them. I think they're pretty much got this grey sort of format, but if you go back into sort of the Vedic, you know, you go back into the Indian literature, and you'll find the fact that we had a blue race of actually more human-like blue race of aliens. Or even on the planet, I think there was this blue race. It's counted there. So there's loads of reference. So this whole idea that, you know, that aliens are green or they're grey is not true. They're, you know, obviously this blue thing has got a history somewhere, and there's a whole race of these very intelligent. They're very science-based. These blues from this planet called Haven. Which I can't. I really wish I had time to go into that whole side of things. Okay, right. So while this gets it gets geopolitical because they've been in touch for some. This is so according to the guy that I've been in touch with, who's been in touch with these blue ET race. They've been in touch for some time, these ETs, with high-ranking Argentine officials. Hence the discussions with the base. I'm guessing that the base was built there to do some sort of interaction with these ETs. I don't know to what sort of extent that was. Apparently the US were also aware. I mean, this is guesswork at the moment, but this is what I've heard. The US were also aware of their mission, which we'll hear about in a minute. So I've asked the question that given the UK's position within the territory of the Falklands and its relationship to the USA, were they also aware? Were they aware that this ET base was on this bizarre island down in the South Atlantic? Having come to the end of 2 years of research looking into this, I'm pretty sure that at upper defence levels in the UK, we were totally aware of what was going on to an extent down in this South Atlantic region. Interestingly, went to do, while I was looking back at this about a while ago, 6 to 12 months ago, went to our National Archives again and did loads of research spent days endlessly, sat at the PC doing research on the Falkland Islands and the documents that had been released. What's interesting, I cut this off here, my screen thingy cut this off. What that says there, this is the specific document, which is huge, it's a huge document. When I tried to order a document that I think was a similar size, because you get a page count, they wanted £380 for it to send it me in print form. So this was a huge document. Where it cuts off there, it basically goes on about this is the treaty that covered when the British went to this island at the end of the war, that basically this was the treaty agreement that went down with the Argentinians, which I've got some footage of as well, you'll see in a minute. So at the end of that, it mentions South Sandwich Islands and Thule Island, so it's mentioned there. What's interesting is that you can order virtually every Falklands Treaty document. You can also order all the stuff to do with the war, with logistics of packing, which ship was there. You can get. I went and found numerous ones of those. When you try and get to this particular document to do with this series of islands that I showed you in South Fuel, you'll find that out of all these other documents, this one is closed for 40 years until January 2019. So I couldn't get it. I found a similar size one just to get a price of it, but this is the one that they wouldn't let order. This one's been closed down, so I don't know. That may mean nothing. It might be something else is going on, but it's just interesting. Okay, this is a guy that I got in touch with whilst doing this research. I was desperately trying to find. I couldn't get many people from the British forces because, as you'll see, it was special forces, SAS and Special Boat Service that went in and did the operation, as well as the Royal Marines. And I couldn't find. I went to loads of forums and tried to get British servicemen to come forward, and I had a real problem. I had one person come forward. But I did get in touch with a really nice guy called Carlos. This is him in 1980 or 81, I think. You can see the base that I've shown you in the background. This is Thule Island there. It's all linked. It's a volcanic island, and this is again the base that they were on. And he's given me loads of information about what he was doing. He was a lieutenant who was involved in supplying the base. He was also involved in certain things to do with weather anomalies and certain things. But there's a whole array. There was 18 people there basically at once, and 9 of those were soldiers. I think that was it. And he mentioned that he remembers on the 13th of January, he must have kept his diary, in 1981, helicopter flew over from HMS Endurance. Again, this is this, in advance of the Falkland Islands War, this is what was keeping an eye on this area, and they were sending helicopters over to see what was happening. Again, you've got to remember, tiny little island. I know the Argentines have come and plonked a base there, but really, you know, it's not a, you know, it's obviously not a really high-tech thing. It's probably, it looks, you know, British intelligence will probably know that's some sort of science base or other. So you think under normal circumstances, why would they be keeping such an eye on this place? That's a long shot down from the side, presumably the side of the volcano or something, down onto this sort of glacier-like plateau. Anyone who used to be into CB radios or amateur radio might know what a QSL card is, but he sent me this, so I just thought I'd include it. This is if you use amateur radio, then if you got a contact that's really quite far away, they used to, in the post, used to send you a card. So I thought this was interesting because obviously they were operating these sort of things from there. There's a group from Argentina that also went over and did amateur radio stuff between there and Antarctica. So that just says, you know, scientific station, and the date there, 1978. Okay, so a bit more on this base, and it starts to get really quite bizarre at this point. Let's do a time check. Okay, so this blue race, these blue ETs were in this underground base for a certain purpose. They had to be in a really cold climate because what they'd found, or what they knew from their past knowledge, species knowledge, galactic history, all this stuff that we hear about in the contact literature, is there's a certain substance that's been put on this planet. It's a black oil-like substance, and it contains nanites, or it's got a nanotechnological side to it. In other words, it's artificially, or it's sentient, or artificially intelligent. For some reason, they were de-engineering this substance. That's the words that apparently were used. And this substance has to be kept in cold to stop it activating. It starts to morph. You'll hear more about this later. I put it, a lot of this is reading between the lines because I've had this contact with this guy who's been in touch with these blue rays. So the science base had a small military garrison, as we've seen on top. My guess is that some form, given that the ETs were in touch with high-ranking Argentine officials, that the ETs, there was some sort of mutual agreement between the two going on. The fatal error that Argentina made, apparently according to Alec Newell, the guy I spoke to, is that because they'd had this long-standing relationship, because they'd either been invited to set this base up or had some sort of cooperation between the underground base where these ETs were and the base on top, the Argentines obviously long wanted to claim back these islands that they sort of see that they're theirs. They assumed that given the technology that they'd obviously seen and used in this base, UFOs, probably met this group of ETs, had conversations with them about these various issues, including this black nano oil substance. They assumed that if they invaded and a war started, that these, I don't know why, because we rarely see ETs taking a side in anything like this, but they assumed naively that these ETs would take their side on a war against the British if they invaded the island. That was what I was told, and obviously it didn't work. So I've got to credit the guy that's had has had an amazing experience. Go and buy his book if you want a really good read. The guy's an engineer. He's not your average dippy contactee. The guy's an engineer. He wrote ages to write the book. He just gives his account in a very sort of straight way. Co-Evolution, that's his website. He does a blog very, very occasionally. It's quite hard to get hold of. Very occasionally he'll do a blog entry. But his perspectives on things, given what's happened to him, he was taken to their planet, basically, and told a lot of things about the current era. I'm crediting him for the information about this blue ET race. I'm absolutely 100% convinced that he is authentic and he had this experience. I have no doubts in my mind at all. Okay, so essentially what happened at the end of the Falklands War, what's interesting was they went and cleared the main. So you've got South Georgia and I need to get a map again. You've got South Georgia and you've got the main Falkland Islands, Port Stanley, etc. If you know the bit of history, they went and cleared all those islands first. The British got back on top. What was interesting is at the end of the war, they got a fleet together and they sent this fleet, not insignificant, to go and surround this Thule Island. None of this got into the press. There's small amounts. You go on Wikipedia, there's little bits on it. I think this was just seen as some, another island that we took at the end of the war, but it's very strange the way they waited and then sent this fleet to clear this. So I made some interesting points about this whole thing. Did the British know about Thule Island and the de-engineering of this advanced nano-like substance up front? Because the interesting point, of course, what was the Falklands War about? And you've got to make your own mind up about that. So it's the chicken and egg situation. So did they know about this ET base and this artificial black oil technology that they wanted to get hold of? Or was the Falklands about other mixed issues? Or was it a mix of both? I don't know. So I've just mentioned there, was it engineered? We know that the US worked very closely with the UK. If you go and look at the press cuttings, there were certain people like Haig and who's the other guy? There's Haig and there's Caspar Weinberger. These are really big guys from the Ronald Reagan, big guys, Council of Foreign Relations. All those groups you hear about from Illuminati type groups, Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission. These guys were doing the main hopping between America and Britain constantly during the Falklands War. So again, relations between the US and UK, and did the US want to push Britain a certain way? I don't know. Or was this mostly British led? So this was Operation Keyhole. Interesting name. Interestingly, the military name for the actual whole Falklands War was Operation Corporate, which strange title. Operation Keyhole, interesting title for an operation, was the name for this tiny little island with this insignificant little military weather station thing on top. So they sent a frigate, HMS Yarmouth, an ice patrol vessel, that's Endurance, went there again, a huge supply ship, what I seen called Oleander, and a rescue tug, obviously because of the conditions, and sent those along with a squad of Royal Marines. And if you read into literature, there was also the SAS and the Special Boat Squadron were also there. You have to go into deeper accounts to find that admitted. So again, big party for a minor scientific space. So again, asking what did they know? What point did they know about this stuff? Managed to get some footage. I thought this was quite interesting. I'm going to play it. It's only like 2 minutes long. I've got to turn this down because this one's loud. This is basically news footage mixed in with the guy who took photos from the base that I said. He took his own photos, and I think someone else did the video. So it's news footage mixed in with photos of the base. This actually shows the base being raided, and they blew the base up. Not only did they blow the base up on top, they actually got down. The Royal Marines seemed to take care of the top bit, and the Special Services seemed to go and locate. I don't know the exact date for that, whether it was on this date or later, because there was 2 raids on this island and 2 explosions, from what I can gather. So you'll just watch this for a minute. Let's turn this down. I think that's it. As you can see, I think I've got another shot in a minute. They did a pretty good job. They made sure nothing was left standing. And again, you ask yourself, if this was just some weather monitoring station or doing basic Antarctic science, what was the point in using the charges? If you saw that one shot, it's like a mushroom cloud that they've gone to destroy this base. Given that the guys on the base were apparently very friendly, gave up, put the white flag up, gave up, and got taken off the island, and yet they went in and did all this. It's really, really bizarre. And the Argentinians I spoke to never quite understood it either. They didn't understand the proportion of the British response to what they considered was their... I've only spoken to one guy. They didn't understand the response of the British to what they said was a scientific survey base. I don't think the guy I spoke to knew what was going on elsewhere. I've not broached that with him. I've tried to sort of leave that out. Actually, final shot. I mean, it's all it's all like you shape charge your cutter charges there and destroyed it. Okay, so what appears to have happened is when the war started, obviously I don't know whether there were discussions with the Argentinians going, hey ETs, can you help us, give us some of your high-tech stuff so we can defeat the British. Don't know what happened, but anyway, quite wisely, this blue race of ETs apparently left this underground base in Thule, and they left in a hurry, and this is where the problems began, or what Britain doesn't see as a problem, but probably may have become a problem. And of course, if they left in a hurry, you leave certain things behind. There's a whole side story, again, that I can't go into, about what happened to their craft as it was being flown off to, and they've got one other base apparently on the planet, and as it was being flown, it was shot down by a weapon, and that's a whole other side to this, and a fascinating story. So after the removal of the Argentine soldiers, the scientists, the SAS and the Special Boat Service basically were tasked with locating this underground base, found various technologies, that's all I know, and also samples of this infamous black nano oil. So I put at the bottom, it points to prior knowledge of the Blue ET Group project and Argentine involvement with this, meaning the Falklands conflict may have been initiated for different reasons than most of us remember. And that's the whole point I'm trying to get across, is with all these many world wars, then many conflicts, many situations that we see geopolitically today have got this ET element to them, this high technology element to them, free energy, or ET cover-up element to them. We see it time and time again. It seems to be there nearly all the time. So as part of the trying to get a grip on what this black substance is, we'll go into it a little bit more in a minute, but I found, has anyone been seeing Prometheus, the film? 3, 4, 5, that's, yeah, a quarter of you. A great film, but if you noticed, again, was about a black morphing liquid that at certain points, this whole idea of stealing fire from the gods, technologies, this sort of thing, all these memes and stuff that are going around, these metaphors, I thought it was a great film. But this is Alex Jones on this, and he puts this in context. If you remember what we've just said about this oil and about the British desperation to get this oil, and why were the ETs de-engineering this highly tech that's buried deep in the ground? Why were they trying to de-engineer this oil at this weird moment, this 2012 era in history? So if you don't like Alex Jones, you're going to have to close your eyes. If you've listened to Alex Jones for a decade or whatever, then that's quite a shift for him, because of course, he used to be totally ridiculing the little green men thing. So for him to now shift and be presenting, and I think he did that really articulately, the sort of whole view of this breakdown of what Prometheus, the whole idea of it could be for the film with the script, and how it sort of meanders into these other areas of life. I thought that was a really good summary there. Okay. Gets weirder now, because of course at the end of the Falklands War, if you've then found this alien base and you found this high technology, then you've got to take it back, and you've got to find people who are going to do something with it. And the usual problem that people have is, of course, that how, on the scale of our knowledge, whereabouts does this ET technology that they found, whether it's crash disks or whatever, or raided bases in this case, at what level does it mesh with our own sort of science and discoveries and our own scientific knowledge? And we seem to have run into a bit of a problem with this nano oil, because it got taken back and dumped at a company called Marconi, a British company called Marconi, and you'll see what happens in a minute. One of the points I wanted to make is I think that the USA, with its infrastructure, is far more ready to deal with stuff like this. So because of the amount of crashes they've had, because of the whole infrastructure they've had set up since 1947 when they created the national security state, they've got this pretty much a foolproof system. Those of you that here last month and saw Dan Sherman talk will hear about how just, not a minor project, but a fairly small project, the amount of security clearances he had to go through, the amount of training, how it was all set up. They've got this thing down to a T. If they're dealing with anything to do with contact with ETs or ET technology, they've got a system in place to do it. I don't think that even in the 80s we were anywhere near that good at it, because this has got errors written all over it. Some of you might know about the whole Makani deaths issue, and it's been one of those things that's been around the internet for ages, and it was just a revelation to me when you put these two things together. So you've got to remember the years. So 1982, back from the Falklands in the summer. I'm going to make a link between the Marconi deaths that take place that are bizarre. But again, it comes from two directions. I just haven't got time to go into it. Basically, it comes from the guy who's in contact with these blue ETs, who also was in touch with a guy from South African intelligence, and South African intelligence quite weird with the things they're into. I knew that years ago, and when he told me that he'd had this link with the guy from South African intelligence, he basically told him that's where the British took it to. But you don't even need to know that. You just need to see what happens next, because there is no precedent in modern history, for what happened at Marconi and the rate at which it happened, and you'll see anyway. Okay, so Marconi, British company, famous radio company, but opened up its first office in Britain, and linked to BAE Systems. Started off making radios, but then got into the defence industry, everything else. You can go and look all that up for yourself. You'll see, when you see these deaths that I'm going to go and see, you'll see they're attributed to two companies, mostly Marconi, but also another company called Plessey, another really high-tech firm. Another British firm, specialised in communications again, also sort of hydraulics and stuff like that, but the cutting edge and stuff. And what's interesting, if you look, again, coincidence, but talk about combining assets, then it's just an interesting day. In 1986, Plessey, one high-tech firm, and Marconi were both under the umbrella of GEC, this big American company. Then these two companies merged in 1986. I just thought that year was interesting. That just another little sort of snippet on top. Okay, so this is strange. It's hard to get British newspapers on this, but this was huge at the time. It's obviously because you're going back to the mid 80s. Then a lot of those things aren't. Newspapers weren't published online. But essentially, this caused. It was weird because it caused media. The media kept reporting about these deaths of these scientists, but no one put it together. No one apart from. I'll just go and get. I've got a book here. If you want to know more. If you want to know more about this particular aspect of this, then that's the book by Tony Collins, and it's called Open Verdict. And it's called An Account of the 25 Mysterious Deaths in the Defence Industry, published in 1991. And that goes into all this, not into this aspect, but he just looks at these strange deaths that took place. So media covered it. The reason Tony Collins got access to this and started to write the book is because he was editor of Computer Weekly. This one, I put this in on purpose. He was editor of Computer Weekly. So because a lot of these people were based in these high-tech defence industries, these things kept coalescing on his desk, whereas to other newspapers and writers and stuff, they were perhaps seemed a little bit disparate. To him, he said he kept getting these reports of these deaths on his desk, so he decided to look into it. He was amazed that no one else had done that. Okay, so I've got here the one, two, how many sheets? Anyway, this is a slight write-up, 1, 3, 4, 8 pages. This is the death dossier of the Marconi deaths and goes into details in all these. Some of this is on here. No, I haven't got time to go into all these. These murders and suicides are completely bizarre, absolutely bizarre. They just get surreal. You can go online and find these. This is a really quite a popular document. But I just wanted to make the point that nothing was happening like this before. I mean, you might have your odd deaths and people stress from work and stuff before this. In this defence industry is probably known for this, but not at this rate. So it's highlighting you've been highlighted all these dates. So again, back from the Falklands War, March 82, April 83, March 85. Each one of these is a death or a suicide that had more or less an open verdict on it. In other words, they hadn't got a clue. They had to be investigated. They didn't have a clue what sort of happened. Most of them were then quashed and closed down very efficiently. They got very good at doing it towards the end. But anyway, if you see these dates, it then picks up in the mid-80s, 86, 88, another death, 87, 87. You can see some of these. We haven't got time to. I wish I could read some of these out to you because they're fascinating. But you can see shotgun blast, death leap, decapitation. That one was bizarre. This guy apparently tied a rope round his neck, tied the other end of the rope to a tree, pressed the accelerator in his car, and pulled his own head off. I just think that's for a computer program, that imaginative to do that. I don't know, just strange. Asphyxiation, 1987, and it goes on again. 87, 87, 87, 87, 87, 87, 87, 87, and it goes on. 88, 88, 88, 88, 88 again. All of these completely bizarre. 22 deaths, all related to, and this is all were working for one of these companies. They were all related to Marconi or Plessey. Some were working for the MOD, but were sort of working on a side project, but they were all related to Marconi. I challenge anyone to go and find another case where you've got this many strange murders and strange suicides. They're all classed as suicides, actually. If you go back and look, they're all classed as suicides or mysterious deaths. None are classed as murders, really. And you find me another example in recent history where, even with a huge firm, that you can find that many deaths linked to those. So you can guess at the point I'm making here that if these couple of channels came and said that, yeah, this thing was found, this high technology was found in this base in the Falklands, and then all of a sudden this sort of stuff starts happening. One link that they've made to all these deaths from Marconi is that it was all to do with the Star Wars project, and I spent days looking into this particular side of things. Actually, the Star Wars thing, which was, talk about at the start when I said that these certain things that resonate with you when you were a child or as you're growing up and stuff, then that was another one, with all the Star Wars stuff. Because I remember Thatcher came out, there's been this argument for ages between Thatcher and Reagan and their various officials that were going, they were saying, look, pushing the Star Wars thing, we need this nuclear defense thing, and Thatcher wouldn't have it. And then she changed her mind instantly one day. I don't know whether that was money or whether that was disclosure of something else. But the major point is that was in 1983. So I was thinking that, yeah, well, Star Wars could be involved on the side here, but I don't think it's a direct sort of response to that. Because Star Wars was pretty well known, and the technology may have been advanced, but it wasn't that way out that it needed protecting hugely from someone that, or it was that weird that it needed you start killing your own workforce off. So I don't know. So I put, yeah, Star Wars probably also covered the alien issue, but had its own grey covering form, because a lot of people say that about intercontinental ballistic missile defence. A lot of people are saying that basically, and I think that's totally true. You speak to most people, see Stephen Greer and stuff, then that the whole Star Wars thing was this perhaps slight cover for the fact that we had these other weapons that were pointing outwards and also detecting incoming vehicles from outer space. And I'm going to make a point at the end about this, but some of this nanotech technology may have entered these more recent space weapon systems, which we'll see at the end. Okay, you asked where this came from. Well, here's another link from this link between Marconi and this Falklands Islands war. This is strange Marconi death number 9. This guy called Victor Moore, who I found on this list way before I found this bit of information from this guy, design engineer for Marconi. In 1997, Victor Moore was found dead of a drug overdose, and his death is listed as a suicide. His wife actually thinks his might be one out of all of these. She thinks it might well have been a suicide, but we'll see another angle to that in a minute. He wasn't pleased with what he had been told to do at his job. That was her words. So the South African guy that I just mentioned when you asked the question before, Alec Newold, who's the guy who has met the blue ETs, calls him Mr. X. He's from South African intelligence. He's now dead, which is why this information he's come out, and he's communicated with me about it, and he's put a little bit in that book at the end in a addition to the book. That was one of his quotes down there. This guy, you need to know the background to this South African intelligence guy. He basically had been to Antarctica. He'd done crash retrievals in Africa, South Africa. He was well in with some of the Americans and other things, and was very interested in. He was very interested in. He came across the guy Alec who met the blue ETs. He came across his case and actually visited him when he was in prison for another side story. Anyway, that's his quote. The British struck gold in the early 1980s. And these are two other quotes. Again, I'd found the name Victor Moore before I found out this. So this is a quote from Alec Newell's. I think this is just personal communication. I think this was to me. My contact in South Africa knew one of the Marconi guys, as he studied in the UK with him years before, and that is Victor Moore. He was the one that noticed when the oil was switched on. That's really quite important. This oil is sentient, intelligent, highly advanced. This oil was switched on because they noticed this because they started to get interference with the British, global, but this was in Britain, the weather satellites. So as these top scientists at Marconi started interfacing with this oil using computers, if you look down the list, most of these people are computer simulations people, satellite and communications specialists. If you look at their background, that's what gives away a lot of what this is about. And so they obviously. Victor Moore was the guy that apparently was there when they first found out that this stuff could be activated. God knows how they did it. And when it was on, then it interfered with certain frequencies that linked to our weather satellites. And another one, this one's from the book. This friend let slip one day about a new robotic fluid their computer and engineer guys were working on that could be programmed with radio frequencies. They thought it might be able to use it hydraulically, which would open up all kinds of new design fields. When he asked around, this is the interesting bit, no one knew who invented it or where it might have come from, nor even any talk of patents to buy from another company. So again, that's the same as sort of the Roswell situation stuff, isn't it? It's just like, well, did that technology just appear from nowhere? And no one could sort of trace parts of it and stuff. And it's the same sort of thing. It goes back to the issue of what I was saying before about what happens when you get this high-tech stuff that's from other civilizations and you suddenly get access to it. What happens? Well, it wasn't all great new inventions. A lot of negative stuff went on with this. It's the book. I'll summarize the book for you if you want. You can get it yourself. It's on Amazon. You can get it for 1p. The investigation by Tony Collins did a really good job on it, but of course he viewed it in sort of it was the 80s. This thing took place in the 80s, and if you remember the 80s, there was still a lot of Cold War stuff going on. The Rendlesham issue took place. Larry Warren told me that there was huge, at the time he was there was huge issues between Russia and us, and all sorts of alerts going off. So the 80s still had that era about the whole Cold War thing. So Tony Collins viewed it like that, always attributed it to the whole SDI thing, or said it was inconclusive. The other point people make is like, it was the defence industry and they were stressed at work, so that was it. But none of that washes. Pointed that out. Most of the research missions were into computer simulation, but there was lots of other fields, as I mentioned, communications, satellites. Computer modelling was really big. It's a burgeoning new area then, but computer modelling was what most of these people were in. Interestingly, I don't know if I've got time to do this, if you take that dossier of death, if you take these deaths apart and the circumstances, and you get the data out of this book as well, you start to see a few patterns. And in 1982-83, they assigned the first two people to die were both older academics. They brought in a specialist, one of the leading specialists in computer science from Essex University, I think it was. And then the other guy was a senior guy linked to the MOD Science Institute, something like that. Both older guys. Obviously, the point I'm making is they're managers and they're quite experienced. So, likely they brought these managers in and basically had to say, well, we've got this new project. The next two people that die, absolutely bizarre deaths, were two very young. I don't think I've got the dates of them there. Their age, I think they were 23 and 26. Two young, highly skilled Asian computer programmers. They died literally a couple of years later. So you get a glimpse of what's starting to happen, that perhaps Marconi came along, they created a project, and they're like, what on earth are we going to do with this stuff? We don't know much about it, we've heard that it's ET based, so they have to bring in people from outside. This is what I'm saying, I don't think Britain then had the structure that the US had. Did they keep it quiet and not give it to the US, or didn't want to disclose all of it? But whatever happened, something went wrong at Marconi, and they had to bring in people that were outside the usual military or defence industry channels. That's my impression of what went on. So hence, if you have to then say, oh my life, right, So if you have to then basically bring people in and you have to disclose a certain amount, especially if this technology at a certain level, you have to disclose a certain amount of stuff. And I think people started getting freaked out. People didn't want to get involved with it because I'm going to have to rush through this now. This is a real shame because there's a bit more. So I just mentioned those. I've gone through the same sort of theories that I've said there, that this whole project was set up, that we were ill-equipped to deal with it, and hence you get these series of deaths because not only is it dangerous if people start talking, but the whole issue of this oil thing itself, as you'll see if I rush through these slides, is actually incredibly weird. I'll just read that out quickly. So this is another quote from the same guy. He also thought something about the job had really, this is about Victor Moore again, had been bugging his friend, but he could not talk about it openly. He did say he was working on something out of his field, indeed out of everyone's field at Marconi. He didn't feel he was up to it or comfortable with it. He even let slip it was a little spooky what the stuff could do. Even then, the reaching into these, so it had its advantages. They did. It looks like the British and Marconi got a grip of this stuff in a certain way, and it's made revolutionary things. Quick reference to Morgellons and nanotech. You can go and look. Most of you probably know about Morgellons and this stuff that's invaded lots of people's bodies, and when you put it under a microscope, it's got these nano robots, these nanobiological robots that interface with DNA, and they also communicate, they also respond to frequency. So I'm just trying to make a wider image to that sort of thing there. Making a point about Morgellons here, that's a bioagent that seems to attack the body. If you've seen all the images online of people with these weird wires coming out of them and stuff, an awful thing it is. But the history of this stuff, from what we gather, this is more of a planetary agent. In other words, this stuff has been put in these deep-seated places underground, under pressure, under sea, for what Alex Jones mentioned, a planetary rewrite. In other words, it's to do with terraforming planets. That's why they were trying to deactivate it at this moment. This thing looks like it was set to go off at a certain point. Yeah, mentioned that about 2012 and about them de-engineering the situation. Quick things about this oil. This oil, this is the bits we know about it, and some of this is based on other scientific stuff that we've linked to it. Stays dormant under pressure under the seabed. Appears to be in several regions around the planet. You'll see more about that on the next slide. It reacts to warmth and is catalyzed by seawater. It can morph into a vast variety of forms within its chemical structure. It causes illnesses. I haven't got time to go into that. Causes illness in humans in some circumstances, sends signals when activated, has magnetic qualities. Okay, I want to go into this. Deepwater Horizon, the Gulf oil disaster that went on. I can't believe I've got 5 minutes left. I've cocked up my timer. Because what you think went on there didn't go on there. And they were doing some abnormally deep drilling. And if you have time, because you're not going to hear it from me now, go to the net and try and find this. It's a Nexus article, but it was linked to a forum where a guy who was related to a French diplomatic corps posted daily with an issue that was happening in the Gulf at the time. A week after that oil rig went up, you basically had got you'd basically got a standoff between 8 nations, all with submarines underneath and a few with floats on top, boats on top. You basically got a standoff going on between these. They were all down monitoring this oil rig, and weird things started to happen. Weird things started happening to the submarines. They started malfunctioning. You need to go and read that. That sounds really far out at the moment. You need to go and read that document to find out. The language it's written in is in this code. It's been translated from French, but it's in this diplomatic code from this special radio that they have connected. So you need to go and do that. The summary points of what happened in this standoff, go and find that article. A French sub was almost sunk. This is 2010, remember. It was saved by the French's own special forces that were down there with it. The whole argument was about a sample of cargo, and the US were demanding on this radio traffic that it be jettisoned. The damaged French sub was forced to surface. The Israeli sub, or the boats on top, tried to board it. There was damage to vessels and equipment. That's interesting. They found a rim near. There's something going on down beneath where the Global Horizon platform was. There's some basin there that they were drilling into, and it was highly secure. They got these sonic detectors around there that they'd placed. It was like no normal setup for an oil rig, nothing at all. Standoffs, these were the nations that were involved, according to the French diplomat who was getting this channel. Russian subs arrived, and yeah, there's talk of these weird things about activated cargo, illnesses in some sailors, splash zones. This seems to be a code word that that was used on this radio thing, that we think is when this substance, which has been drilled out, starts to activate with seawater and starts activating itself. As they said, it's in this stuff's in other parts of the world. If you look around the certain places, there's another couple that it's possibly things are going on. If you go and look what's happening in Antarctica at the moment, particularly in a place called the Great Dome or Lake Vostok, you've got bizarre deep drilling going on, all for reasons apparently to get these great biological specimens that haven't been touched for years, but according to other information, there's another side to this sort of story as well, which is along the similar lines to what we've been discussing, and this technology that they're after and trying to study. Now you'll find that China has just built a huge base down in that area. Just before the South African intelligence guy died, he claimed the British went down again. The English, came back down looking for more of this stuff quite recently, and connected, as he called it, most of those connected to the dig, as he called it, got really sick. And there is, you can find evidence of these people having to be flown back from this Antarctic survey station. They put a lid on it real quick. I was down there that year. I'm glad I didn't have anything to do with it, which he added was at the Great Dome, which is central to Antarctica. Voss, I haven't got time to do that one. In this coded communication under the Gulf of Mexico that we got from the French diplomat, operations deep freeze and antifreeze were mentioned, constantly mentioned, but in a reference form. This diplomat found this out afterwards. Deep freeze and antifreeze, you can go and find. Deep freeze is a long-term US Antarctic mission that's got some quite strange things to do with it, and this operation, this key word, this key phrase was being quoted again and again. Speculation, all I was going to point, this is the last couple of slides, I was going to make a point and say that if you know Anthony Sanchez, I've just heard that he's coming to talk in Edinburgh. If you know about Anthony Sanchez's work, he had this whole disclosure that, that's me, that was about right then. He had this whole disclosure that there's a problem at the moment that one group of ETs that seem to be linked to this Dulce base, this famous Dulce base that he's done a lot of research on, had basically given a technology that allows nano-functioning satellites, small satellites that are artificially intelligent, that are here to defend the planet from another race of ETs coming in. It's a hugely long story and it's fascinating, but apparently these satellites are hugely high-tech and are, again, semi-sentient, and the concern that the whistleblower had that came out and told Anthony Sanchez his concerns was that these satellites either had some code put in by the Greys or would start operating themselves and would turn on us. That was he's basically saying this AI, this nano stuff that's up there in these things is running these things, and it's not under our control. Those are hazy photos of John Leonard Walsham, who's a British astrovideographer. He's had these space platforms that no one seems to pay much attention to, but they're absolutely amazing. You can find those online, I'm thinking that those are part of this program, because every time he puts pictures of those up on YouTube, he gets huge, great helicopters taking roof tiles off his house constantly. Every time he puts one up, they'll come and buzz his house with a new military huge helicopter. So I put this reason, what is it? What's all this stuff? We've got a seed bank going off in the Arctic at the moment, huge, complex idea for this seed bank apparently, and underground tunnel boring machines. So what do the hierarchies of the planet know that we don't, and is it related to the idea that they have known for some time, which should go back to this whole history, it seems they have, certainly since the post-war period, that there is some form of terraforming microorganism been planted on this planet that is set to be activated. Because the other thing I haven't got time to go into is there's been certain signals sent from this stuff that is in clumps around the Earth. And I just went through a few points there. One point that the contactee that I spoke to claims is that actually part of the reason for this terraforming substance that's there is because it was put there in case we sort of screwed up as a civilization. Well, we sort of done that in a way. So it can be released it could be activated from space, and hence it just basically consumes the planet or creates another planet in whatever form it wants to. And he claims some of this is to do with the fact that they want to come and put hybrids, which is a very common thread on the contactee literature. As you all know, these hybrid beings that have been sort of bred in a circular form with our DNA, they take our DNA, mix it with some ET DNA, and then the process goes on, and they follow these contactees, take more DNA. There's a circular process with our DNA that's going on, and it seems to be to make a new set of hybrids for this planet. I don't know if that's good news for us or bad news, but that's all I've got time for, so thank you for listening.